Welcome to Module 4, Inferences. You make inferences every day when having face-to-face conversations or even when watching television or a movie. When Dirty Harry utters his famous words, "Go ahead, make my day," most of us know what he means. You do not want to mess with Dirty Harry. He clearly isn't in a good mood, and it's not like he wants someone to tell him a knock-knock joke to try to cheer him up. We know what Dirty Harry really means because we are able to read between the lines. We don't take his words at face value. We listen to the sinister tone of his voice and look at the deadly stare to interpret what he really means. It's sort of like when your mom says, "You're going out of the house," and that. Her arms crossed, eyebrows raised, and voice tinged with equal parts disbelief and irritation let you know that you need to put on something a little nicer before you set out for the day or evening. In both cases, we infer meaning. When we talked about implied meaning idea, we said that to imply means to hint or suggest at something. So even though Dirty Harry and your mom said one thing, all the other cues and clues hint at something in addition to their literal words. Therefore, when something is implied, you need to make logical inferences to figure out what the meaning really is. Let's see if we can make some logical inferences based on a reading passage. We'll look at the following passage together that is a letter written from a young woman who's away at college to her high school sweetheart who's waiting back home. Dear Michael, how nice of you to write. Has it really been 45 days since we last spoke or had any contact? I got all your texts, voicemails, and Facebook messages, but there's just been so much going on. Time sure is flying by this semester, and I have been so busy with my classes and work at American Eagle. Actually, I really like school and work. I've met a lot of great people. A friend of mine from writing class also works at the mall, so we sometimes carpool and have lunch together. He's a really great writer, so he has been tutoring me a few days a week. Anyway, you wrote that you would like to visit next month, but between my classes, work schedule, and tutoring, I don't think I will be able to spend much time with you, so it would be silly for you to drive all the way up here and then hang out alone in my dorm room while I am out and about. I will be home for Thanksgiving break, so we should definitely try to get together for lunch. Say hello to your family for me, and we will talk again soon. Sincerely, Elizabeth. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Yep, it definitely seems like Michael is out of the picture and this tutor is in. How do we know this? Well, if we use our background knowledge in addition to the facts presented, it's pretty obvious. Let's break down this letter. First of all, we have Dear Michael. Now that seems like a rather formal way to start a letter to a high school sweetheart. Now we know that Michael's been trying to contact Elizabeth through any means possible. He's been texting, he's been calling, he's been trying to get her on Facebook, and we know that he's been counting down the days since they last spoke. But she, on the other hand, is playing dumb. Has it really been that long? We know that she knows it's been that long. It all starts out innocently enough. She's telling him about her classes and work and making new friends at both places, but then, right about here, this little innocent pronoun slips in. And now we know that her new friend, whom she's been spending so much time with, is really a boy, and that changes the whole ballgame. Oh, and of course, in addition to taking classes, working, and eating lunches together, she needs to spend even more time with him because he's a really great writer and she needs him to tutor her. Now, Michael makes the offer to drive up and go see Elizabeth at school, but we know that she doesn't want him there. In fact, when we read between the lines, we're able to figure out that even if he does make the trip, she's not planning on spending any time with him. Right about here, she tells him, "It would be silly for you to drive all the way up here and then hang out alone in my dorm room while I am out and about." We know who she's going to be out and about with. Our suspicions tell us it's definitely going to be that other guy, which is just cruel. She's not even committing to spending any time with him when she's home for break. Down here, she uses the word definitely. She says, "We should definitely try to get together for lunch." Well, I can definitely try to do a lot of things, but if they don't happen, I can always say that I tried. I know Elizabeth's tricks. Finally, look at the way she closes the letter. "Say hi to your family for me, and we'll talk again soon." So we know she won't be spending any time with him over Thanksgiving break, and then she finishes the letter with sincerely. Who closes a message to their true love with sincerely? So the future doesn't look too bright for Michael and Elizabeth. In fact, I would venture to guess that the present isn't even an option for them at this point. She has clearly implied in this letter that she has moved on, and we are easily able to infer that. But poor Michael, on the other hand, is probably changing his Facebook status to "it's complicated" and is still waiting around for their lunch date. So, in order to make inferences, we can use our background knowledge, yes. But sometimes we might read about topics we don't really know that much about. Therefore, yes, use your background knowledge. But even if we're familiar with the topic, which makes it easier for us to make inferences, the best thing to do is to stick with the facts. The biggest reason why we want to rely heavily on facts is because sometimes we may read something and make an inference that seems logical, but upon further examination, we see that our inference was incorrect. Also, when doing an inferences activity, and you're not going to like this, you might have two choices that both seem right. How are you supposed to make a decision when both of them seem right? Well, you have to choose the one that's more right. How are you supposed to know which one is more right? That's the fact that is, or the choice that is backed up with facts. We can never lose sight of the information that the author gives us when we're trying to make an educated guess. If the author gives you information, use that fact to help you figure out what would be a logical inference. Let's take a look at another example. I'm going to read a passage to you, and then when we're done reading the passage together, we're going to look at some statements and see if we can figure out which of those statements would be logical inferences to make. The community of Idlehour is located on the south shore of New York's Long Island on the Connecticut River, which provides easy access to the Great South Bay and Atlantic Ocean. In the early 1900s, William K. Vanderbilt chose the idyllic location for his estate and built his mansion and all of its amenities for a cost of $9.5 million. He even added man-made canals so that the family could take their boat, the Mosquito, out for short trips to the various accessory buildings on the estate, including a tea house, bowling alley, and greenhouses. The family spent 6 weeks out of every year at the estate, although staff was employed throughout the year to maintain the grounds and buildings. William died in 1920, and the mansion and estate passed through many hands after the Vanderbilt family sold the property. At one time, a spiritual cult occupied the mansion, and after that it was used as a laboratory for dairy research. It is currently occupied by Dowling College. Most of the other buildings are now private residences, including the Garden Keeper's house, which is right next door to my childhood home. Okay, based on this paragraph that we've just read, I'm going to show you some statements, and you need to choose 5 logical inferences. So if I read a statement and you think that that is a logical inference to make based on the paragraph we've just read, jot down the number. Statement number 1 says, William K. Vanderbilt chose the location for the mansion because he enjoyed being on the water. Statement number 2. William K. Vanderbilt had financial difficulties. Number 3. William K. Vanderbilt was a very wealthy man. Number 4. The Vanderbilts had another home. Number 5. It was cheap and easy to maintain the mansion and estate. Number 6. The Vanderbilts probably used Idlehour during the summer months. Number 7. William K. Vanderbilt was very interested in learning about how milk was produced. Number 8. The author of this passage grew up on Long Island. Number 9. The Vanderbilt family has close ties with Dowling College. And number 10. The other buildings on the estate, like the tea house, bowling alley, and greenhouses, have been knocked down. Okay, you should have 5 numbers written down, and those 5 numbers are indicating which one of these statements you think are logical inferences based on the paragraph that we've read. Let's go back to that paragraph and discuss it. Okay, your first statement said William K. Vanderbilt chose the location for the mansion because he enjoyed being on the water. Now this seems like a logical inference. The paragraph does not directly state that he enjoyed being on the water, but it does tell us that he added man-made canals. Right in this section over here. He added man-made canals so that the family could take their boat, the Mosquito, out for short trips. Therefore, it seems like a good educated guess to infer that he enjoyed the water. For now, we will keep this as a maybe in case there are any other statements that seem more right. All right, statement number 2 said William K. Vanderbilt had financial difficulties. Nothing in the passage suggests this. If anything, William K. Vanderbilt was probably a very wealthy man. My background knowledge tells me that I've heard the Vanderbilt name before, and I have heard it associated with money. And the facts in the story tell me that he built a mansion for $9.5 million. That would be a lot of money by today's standards, so it must have made him very well off back in the early 1900s. So I would say no here. I don't think that William K. Vanderbilt had financial difficulties. I do think that statement 3 is a logical inference. Statement number 3 said that William K. Vanderbilt was a very wealthy man. Yes, definitely. That's a logical inference. Statement number 4 said that the Vanderbilts had another home. Now, my background knowledge tells me that wealthy people often have a main home and a vacation home or homes. The facts from the story tell me that the Vanderbilts only spent 6 weeks out of every year at the estate. So I'm assuming that they lived in another home for the majority of the year. So it's a logical inference to assume that the Vanderbilts had another home. Statement number 5 said that it was cheap and easy to maintain the mansion and estate. My background knowledge tells me that a mansion and estate are probably difficult to maintain properly. I find it difficult to keep up with my 2-bedroom condo sometimes. The facts in the story tell me that even though the estate and the mansion were not being used for most of the year, staff was employed throughout the year to maintain the grounds and the buildings. So we're going to say that it probably was not cheap and easy to maintain the mansion and the estate. So no to number 5. Statement number 6 was that the Vanderbilts probably used idle hour during the summer months. My background knowledge tells me that New York can get very cold in the winter, and the facts of the story tell me that the family only visited the estate for 6 weeks out of the year, and we know that they enjoyed using their boat when they were there, so it seems logical to infer that this statement's a yes. Statement number 7 said that William K. Vanderbilt was very interested in learning about how milk was produced. Now, I don't have any background knowledge about this, but more importantly, there is nothing in the paragraph that suggests this. Statement number 8 said that the author of the passage grew up on Long Island. Now, the author ends the passage down here by stating that her childhood home was right next door to the gardener's house. Now, since we know from the beginning of the passage that the estate was located on the south shore of Long Island, and that Long Island is part of New York, it is logical to infer that the author grew up on Long Island. Statement number 9 said that the Vanderbilt family has close ties with Dowling College. This is not a logical inference. The paragraph states that the Vanderbilt family eventually sold the estate after William K. Vanderbilt died. So in 1920, the mansion and the estate passed through many hands after the Vanderbilt family sold the property. It's logical to assume then that the family completely severed its ties with the community of Idle Hour. And statement number 10 said that the other buildings on the estate, like the tea house, bowling alley, and greenhouses, have been knocked down. But if we look back at the passage, it says that most of the other buildings are now private residences, including the garden keeper's house. And we can assume the tea house and the bowling alley. So since those buildings are now being used as private residences, we would not want to infer number 10. So in conclusion, we never found another statement that seemed more right than the first one, so we can logically infer statements numbers 1, 3, 4, 6, and 8. Sometimes we have to make inferences because authors use figures of speech. A figure of speech is a comparison that implies meaning. A figure of speech can be a simile, which uses like, as, or as if to make a comparison. Another type of figure of speech is a metaphor that implies a comparison without using like, as, or as if. Let's take a look at a couple of examples of similes and metaphors. You need another designer handbag like a fish needs a bicycle is a sentence that uses a simile. A fish has absolutely no use for a bicycle, and apparently this person already has enough designer handbags and therefore does not need another one. You can't stop the tornado of anger that is my sister Sally. That's a sentence that uses a metaphor. A tornado is a violent and angry storm, and even though we don't have the words like or as if, The author is comparing Sally to a violent and angry storm, so we can infer that we probably don't want to mess around with Sally. Let's take a look at one last passage and see if we can answer the inferences questions that follow. Now again, we want to use our background knowledge, we want to use the facts, and we want to be on the lookout for any similes or metaphors that are being used that could be clues to help us make some logical inferences. Our math instructor is always a bear on Monday morning. He walks into the room and growls at us to open our books. If we don't have them, he roars. Last week, I thought I had my text with me when I left the house, but when I got to class and took it out of my bag, I realized with great fear and trepidation that I had taken my chemistry book instead. Professor Schroeder stalked up and down the rows of seats as he went over the homework assignment, and the sweat dripped off me like sheets of rain as he slowly approached my seat. I intently stared down at the piece of paper in front of me. I calculated that I would have to provide the answer to number 14, and if I got it wrong, I was doomed. Without the textbook, I had no idea what the question was, so that if the professor angrily told me to try again, I would be lost. I couldn't see or hear through my anxiety, but somehow I squeaked my answer out when he got to me. Luckily, I got it right. I learned my lesson and immediately went home and packed the right book for the next class. If Professor Schroeder is a bear on Monday morning, he is a starving mountain lion by Wednesday. Okay, now that we've read this passage about Professor Schroeder, let's take a look at some questions and see if we can make correct inferences to answer them. Here are some questions for paragraph 2. Number 1. The passage suggests that the instructor's teaching style is A, tolerant and easygoing, B, straightforward and matter-of-fact, or C, irritated and impatient. Jot down what you think is the correct answer. Number 2. Our math instructor is always a bear on Monday morning is A, simile, or B, metaphor. Number 3. We can infer from the passage that the instructor A, randomly calls on students to answer questions about the homework, B, moves in an orderly fashion from one student to the next when going over the homework, or C, allows the students to raise their hands so that he can call on them to answer questions. Number 4, the sweat dripped off me like sheets of rain as he slowly approached my seat. Is it A, simile, or B, metaphor? And number 5, we can infer that the professor A, hates Mondays but is probably in a better mood on Wednesdays, B, has his good days and bad days, or C, is in an even worse mood by Wednesday morning. Okay, you should have your answers for those 5 questions jotted down, and here's what you should have chosen. Number 1, the passage suggests that the instructor's teaching style is, you should have chosen C. C is the correct answer for this one. Everything about the professor, he's a bear, he growls, he roars, he strikes fear and horror into his students, suggests that he is really easily annoyed and does not have much patience. Number 2, our math instructor is always a bear on Monday morning is A, you should have chosen A, simile. I'm sorry, B. Here, the answer is B. That's a metaphor since it makes a comparison without using like, as, or as if. Number 3, we can infer from the passage that the instructor A, randomly calls on students to answer questions about the homework, B, moves in an orderly fashion from one student to the next when going over the homework, or C, allows the students to raise their hands so that he can call on them to answer questions. The answer here was B, since the author tells us the instructor moved up and down the rows. Also, the student was able to correctly calculate which question he would have to answer. So that lets us know that the instructor moved throughout the classroom in an orderly fashion. Number 4. The sweat dripped off of me like sheets of rain as he slowly approached my seats. That one is A. That's a simile since it uses the clue word like to make the comparison. Number 5, we can infer that the professor hates Mondays but is probably in a better mood on Wednesdays, has his good days and bad days, or C, is in an even worse mood by Wednesday morning. That one, well, was pretty easy. I certainly wouldn't want to meet a bear in the woods, but a wild animal that is starving and just happens to be a ravenous mountain lion in this case would be even worse. That's what my background knowledge tells me. But the facts in the story told me that this student immediately made certain that he would not have a similar problem on Wednesday in the next class. So the logical conclusion there was the answer C. So what have we learned about inferences? We learned that we make inferences every day. We learned that sometimes what people say is not always what they mean, so we have to use their other cues, like their visual cues, the look on their faces, the sound of their voice, to help us figure out what they really mean. And we've learned that when authors imply meaning, we need to infer. In other words, when authors hint or suggest at something, we need to make a logical and educated guess to figure out what they really mean. And remember, when we're making a logical and an educated guess, we can use our background knowledge, but we really want to rely on the facts that the author presents to help us figure out the most logical inference.